Chapter 6 of The Secret Passage by Fergus Hume. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read for you today by Dawn Larson in Minnesota. The Secret Passage by Fergus Hume, Chapter 6, A Perplexing Case. The morning after his visit to Lord Caranby, Mallow was unexpectedly called to Devonshire on account of his mother's illness. Mrs. Mallow was a fretful hypochondriac, and always imagined herself worse than she really was. Cuthbert had often been summoned to her dying bed, only to find that she was alive and well. He expected that this summons would be another false alarm, but, being a dutiful son, he tore himself away from town and took the midday express to Exeter. As he expected, Mrs. Mallow was by no means so bad as she hinted in her wire, and Cuthbert was vexed that she should have called him down, but she insisted that he should remain, and, unwilling to cause her pain, he did so. It was 4 days before he returned to London, but his visit to Exeter was not without results, for he asked his mother about Caranby's romance. Mrs. Mallow knew all about it, and highly disapproved of her brother-in-law. "He's crazy," she said vigorously, when the subject was brought up one evening. "All his life he has been queer. Your father should have had the title, Cuthbert." "Well, I shall have it some day," said her son soothingly. "Caranby is not likely to marry." "Yes, but I'll never be Lady Caranby," lamented Mrs. Mallow, who was intensely selfish and egotistical. "And I should have adorned the title, such an old one as it is, too. But I'm glad that horrid Selina Loach never became his wife. Even that Saul girl would have been better." "Don't speak evil of the dead, mother." "I don't see why we should praise the bad dead," snapped Mrs. Mallow. "I never liked either Isabella nor Selina. They were both horrid girls and constantly quarrelling. They hardly ever spoke to one another, and how you can contemplate marrying the daughter of Isabella, I really don't know. Such a slight to me. But there, I've said all I have to say on the subject." To do her justice, Mrs. Mallow certainly had, and never ceased nagging at Cuthbert to break the engagement. Had she known that Mrs. Octagon had forbidden the marriage, she would have rejoiced, but to save making awkward explanations to a woman who would not hold her tongue, Cuthbert said nothing about the breach. "Did you like Miss Saul, mother?" he asked. "I only saw her on the concert platform," said Mrs. Mallow, opening her eyes. "Gracious, Cuthbert, I never associated myself with those sort of people. Caranby was infatuated with her. To be sure, he got engaged to spite Selina, and she really did treat him badly, but I believe Miss Saul, such a horrid Hebrew name, isn't it, hypnotized him. He forgot her almost as soon as she died, in spite of his ridiculous idea of shutting up that house. And such valuable land as there is at Rexton, too. Well, I hope this violent death of Selina will be a warning to Caranby. Not that I wish him any harm, in spite of your being next heir to the title, and we do need money." While Mrs. Mallow rambled on in this diffusive manner, Cuthbert was thinking. When she ended, "Why should this death be a warning to Caranby?" he asked quickly. "Good gracious, Cuthbert, don't get on my nerves. Why? Because I believe that Selina pushed Miss Saul off that plank and killed her. She was just the kind of violent girl who would do a thing like that. And Miss Saul's relatives have waited all these years to kill Selina, and now she's dead, and they will kill Caranby because he did not marry the wretched girl." Cuthbert stared. "Mother, what are you talking about? Caranby told me that Miss Saul only had one brother, and that probably he was dead." "Ah," said Mrs. Mallow. "He didn't tell you that Miss Saul's father was arrested for coining or passing false money, I forget which. I believe the brother was also involved, but I can't be sure. But I only know the girl was dead then, and the Saul family did not move in the matter, as the police knew too much about them." "Good gracious," shuddered the lady. "To think if she had lived, Caranby would have married into that family and have cheated you of the title." "Are you sure of what you say, mother?" "Of course I am. Look at any old file of newspapers and you'll read all about the matter. It's old history now. But I really won't talk any more of these things, Cuthbert. If I do, there will be no sleep for me to night. Oh, dear me, such nerves as I have! Did you ever see Miss Saul, mother?" "I told you I did, on the platform. She was a fine, large, big girl, with a hook nose and big black eyes. Rather like Selina and Isabella, for I'm sure they have Jewish blood in their veins. Miss Saul, if that was her real name, might have passed as a relative of those horrid Loach girls. Mrs. Octagon and her sister who died are certainly much alike." "Of course they are, and if Miss Saul had lived they would have been a kind of triplets. I hate that style of beauty myself," said Mrs. Mallow, who was slim and fair, "so coarse. Every one called those Loach girls pretty, but I never did myself. I never liked them, and I won't call on Mrs. Octagon, such a vulgar name, if you marry 50 of her wretched daughters, Cuthbert." "Don't say that, mother. Juliet is an angel." "Then she can't be her mother's daughter," said Mrs. Mallow obscurely, and finished the discussion in what she considered to be a triumphant manner. Nor would she renew it, though her son tried to learn more about the Loach and the Saul families. However, he was satisfied with the knowledge he had acquired. While returning next day to London, he had ample time to think over what he had been told. Miss Selina Loach had certainly shut herself up for many years in Rose Cottage, and it seemed as though she was afraid of being hurt in some way. Perhaps she even anticipated a violent death. And then Mrs. Octagon hinted that she knew who had killed her sister. It might not have been Caranby after all whom she meant, but one of the Saul family, as Mrs. Mallow suggested. "I wonder if it is as my mother thinks," mused Cuthbert, staring out of the window at the panorama of the landscape moving swiftly past. Perhaps Selina did kill Miss Saul, and shut herself up to avoid being murdered by one of the relatives. Caranby said that Selina did not go to the inquest, but pretended she was ill. Then she and her sister went to the Continent for 2 years, and finally when they returned, Selina, instead of taking her proper place in society as Isabella did, shut herself up as a recluse in Rose Cottage. The Saul family appear to have been a bad lot. I should like to look up that coining case. I wonder if I dare tell Jennings." He was doubtful of the wisdom of doing this. If he told what he knew and set Jennings on the track, it might be that a scandal would arise implicating Mrs. Octagon. Not that Cuthbert cared much for her, but she was Juliet's mother, and he wanted to avert any trouble likely to cause the girl pain. A dozen times on the journey Cuthbert altered his mind. First he thought he would tell Jennings, then he decided to hold his peace. This indecision was not like him, but the case was so perplexing and such serious issues were involved that the young man felt thoroughly worried. Hitherto he had seen nothing new about the case in the papers, but on reaching Swindon he bought a few and looked through them. His search was rewarded by finding an article on the crime. The inquest had been held, and the jury had brought in a verdict of murder against some person or persons unknown. But it was plainly stated that the police could not find a clue to the assassin. The article in question did not pretend to solve the mystery, but collocated the facts so as to put the case in a nutshell. "The facts are these," said the journal after a preliminary introduction. "A quiet maiden lady living at Rose Cottage, Rexton, received 3 friends to a card party. Difference arising, and such things will arise, amongst the best when cards are in question, Two of the friends, Mrs. Herne